I mean, we all have gripes with Rand, but if he became the face of the Republican Party, that's a huge upgrade from, where it has been for
Yes.
sure. I
Yeah.
don't know if that could happen, but,
That's
I think it's possible.
I don't know if he yeah, it's kind of interesting because over the last couple of years, he really kind of has risen to be a superstar. And when it comes to like the Fauci stuff,
Yeah.
because I mean, millions of views, everybody's waiting for those clips to come out where he was tearing him a new one. Honestly, if that is the future of the Republican Party, I'm very, very optimistic in that regards. Although, make no bones about it, Rand isn't perfect on foreign policy, but leaps and bounds better than mostly everybody else. Um, if that's the new face, I'm all for it. I just don't foresee that being it. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I think it's
I
going to be
feel
Ron
like since
DeSantis.
the Republicans like just got kind of doused in cold water because they thought, oh, red wave, we're gonna absolutely murder everybody and take over everything, and they just didn't. Maybe, maybe we can insert some energy here, like, hey, look at these guys who did really well. Because Rand Paul even tweeted something out about how he and Thomas Massey and like every liberty leaning Republican
That's what I was
won
talking about
by
earlier. Yeah.
huge margins. So maybe we can try to goad the Republicans in that direction. I don't know.
What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay? All right.
All right, everybody. This is In Liberty and Health, episode number 151, and multiple return guests to the show. I got Reed, Pat, and Connor with me today, and we're just going to kind of shoot the shit on the midterms. So a little bit off air, we were talking about Blake Masters and Mark Victor, and this has been something that I think everyone's been a little conflicted on, myself included. But there's a lot that's not being talked about in the race, and I think I want to throw it over to Connor first, because he's definitely probably been one of the most insightful people on this, and then we can kind of go around and everyone can give their opinions on it. So Connor, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, as far as the Masters thing goes, my personal opinion on it is that it was an oversight by certain people in leadership. And Dave, throughout the endorsement, I was honestly surprised. So we've all met Mark Victor. Reed and I have interviewed with him, and we're not. I think Reed's recent interview of him was pretty enlightening and was the best thing I've heard him do. When he's been actually, asked about what his policies were. I mean, he was not an ideal candidate by any stretch. He wasn't great on foreign policy, and that's putting it lightly. He made some mistakes throwing out the age of consent comment, and obviously his relationship with Mattis compromised him in that conversation during the debate about wokeness in the military, which is kind of a ridiculous subject anyway. It's just kind of a distraction, but Masters, I think it was a big mistake for him to be endorsed by Dave, just because, the guy is a very ardent Zionist, extremely pro-Israel, anti-Iran. He's very anti-China. If you read his campaign page, the guy is talking about how we have to have, essentially global supremacy in the air, on land, in the sea, and even in space, as he says. We need to have the most technologically capable, military and armed forces, parenthetically, but while keeping defense contractors at bay. Which, if it was like a joke, if this was like Babylon Bee or The Onion, that would have been great, but it wasn't. It was a guy that got endorsed by Dave Smith for fucking Senate. The big problem, I think, with Masters especially, is that the guy is the protege of Peter Thiel, who is a longtime, multi-decade CIA, NSA, FBI, Pentagon contractor, the founder of Palantir, which, Condoleezza Rice and George Tenet, former director of the CIA, have been advisors, major advisors to the company. And so, this is a essentially a national security state billionaire oligarch who is influencing people like Joe Kent and JD Vance and Blake Masters, who he's poured, I guess, somewhere between 10 and I've seen somewhere $15 million into his campaign. And if you read his policies, they match up with financial interests that Thiel has. And there's a great piece about this because I won't remember all the details, but I recommend people go to, it's from last year, Responsible Statecraft, the Quincy Institute's online magazine by Eli Clifton. It's called Peter Thiel's Military Industrial Candidate. And if you read it, I mean, the guy's border policies and his China policies are basically designed to profit Peter Thiel at the expense of individuals' rights, our finances. I mean, obviously, this new Cold War with China is going to bankrupt. Well, we're already bankrupt, but I mean, this is $1 trillion project. It's the primary excuse for spending what we're getting close to now. I mean, almost if you take Robert Higgs's rule of seeing the real military budget is twice the nominal defense budget, we're getting close to spending almost $2 trillion a year at this point, or just a couple $100 billion under that. On the empire, and China is always the excuse, always, especially for the Air Force and the Navy. And so bringing in a guy like this and endorsing him when he is, he can throw out some, nice things he wants to say about foreign policy that are just kind of boilerplate slogans that almost seem like they were cooked up, by like a PR firm or something. It doesn't matter. I mean, the guy supports sanctions on Russia. He wouldn't, nobody, when Ron Paul and Dan McAdams, who, of course we all admire, when they interviewed him and when Dave Smith interviewed him, they did not get any significant concessions as far as I'm concerned on foreign policy, particularly when it came to sanctions, because he wouldn't rule out the use of sanctions, even though he admitted that they're acts of war. He said that the problem with, Biden's sanctions on Russia was basically that they were too, he implemented too many sanctions too fast, but he wasn't opposed to them in principle. But no one followed up and asked him, okay, since you run on Donald Trump's foreign policy legacy, how do you feel about sanctions on North Korea, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, China, go down the list, Nicaragua? What are we? What is your actual foreign policy, and what economic wars would you support? Would you be opposed to in the Senate, and which ones would you favor? Because clearly there's, you do support sanctions. So they didn't get any concessions there. I mean, the guy still supports all the tariffs on China. He said we should never have the conceit of free trade with China because they're a bunch of commies and they're a dictatorship and there's no such thing. And he even talked about to Dave Smith about how we have to make sure that because Taiwan is how it starts, but next thing you know, there's Chinese ships, getting ready to invade us, building up on the California coast. And, it's outrageous, I think, to endorse a guy like that. And the real problem is I don't think enough people have appreciated the conflict of interest that Masters has. And I think, honestly, it would be wise for the endorsement to be rescinded. I know that doesn't look good, but honestly, it's one of those things where if you made a mistake, I think you have to kind of either rectify it or at least come forward and say why you made this decision instead of just ignoring those issues I just brought up, or just saying, well, he's read Rothbard, he's read Mises, and isn't that enough for you people? I mean, come on, we're all on board for this guy, right? Because, a lot of us weren't. But, there were factions, and we all know a lot of these sort of right-wing libertarians, these DeSantis fans and these post-libertarians who were very in favor of guys like Masters. But I think the four of us have been much more skeptical. And I just think that at this point, it's very unfortunate because it seems like unless something is done about that, Dave kind of owns Blake's legacy, whatever he does now in the Senate. Because, I agree with my chair is messing up. The Kingmaker strategy, I think, has some value to it. But I think this one, like debuting it in this race, was strategically unwise because it's a long-term liability depending on what Blake actually does if he wins. And it's kind of up in the air now. It looked like he was going to get destroyed early on after polls closed last night. But we just checked before we went on, and he's like 4 or 5% away from tying it with Kelly. So we'll have to see.
Yeah. And kind of like you were laying out there, the big thing is going to be China the next couple of years. And I know that I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but it's just like you guys always say, nobody's really talking about this. Pat, you seem to kind of be in agreement with most of that stuff as well. So if you have anything to add.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly I understand the argument that, I mean, basically, when it comes to Blake Masters, I understand the lesser of two evil arguments, and I just don't really, I mean, I kind of agree with Dave DeCamp on this point, is that it's just like, well, to a full-throated endorsement of the guy, I just don't really understand. But I think it does bear mentioning, though, that Peter Thiel donated to Ron Paul, and was a large Ron Paul donor, too. So I think when we're thinking about it, we have to try to keep things in perspective, because I don't know, unless you want to re-examine the whole Ron Paul revolution and his origins and where he stands, which I guess isn't beyond reproach, and I think can be useful at times, but I don't think a serious analysis would really fault Ron Paul for accepting donation money from Peter Thiel. So it's all really complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to clarify really quick, because that's an important point. I forgot that the primary difference is, I think, Masters' relationship with Thiel and the fact that his policies will stand to benefit the business interests of Thiel. It's not as if when Ron got the money from Thiel, which I don't know how much it was, but I've heard it was millions of dollars. It wasn't like Ron changed his policies. And guys like him, particularly Thiel, are, they put money into various kinds of political movements and outlets and things, and you'd be surprised where his money ends up. But in the case of Blake, it's a much more of a conflict of interest kind of thing, where it seems more corrupt, pretty blatantly. Whereas with Ron, I think it's just like, I mean, who knows? I mean, Ron's policy, I think, for the longest time in those situations was like, well, I'm not going to change my policies, but I'll take your money, which I think is fine.
Yeah. So one interesting thing that Reed kind of brought up was I can't remember if I was on his show or what, but the whole militarizing the border. This is a real big thing in the MAGA camp, where and I've talked to you guys about this before too, the whole fentanyl pouring over the border, and we got to go after China because fentanyl, and Matt Gaetz saying we should bomb Sinaloa because they're pouring in fentanyl. Reed, you've had a more unique experience in that you've lived all over the place, and you had kind of brought up your struggles with Border Patrol. So I know that's a little bit of a something that you could perhaps shed some light on. So, like I said, if you got anything to add to what they said, and then on top of the idea of militarizing the border, which is a big MAGA con talking point.
Sure. Well, I've lived in Blake's hometown, or I don't know if it's his hometown, but it's where he lives now, Tucson, Arizona. I got most of my dad's family lives out there. And if you go down to Tombstone or any of the, towns that are near the Mexican border, there at least were checkpoints from time to time on Interstate 10 between New Mexico and Arizona. They had checkpoints where they'd stop every car, and they'd ask you if you're an American citizen. And I think any vessel within 100 miles of the border, they have the right to basically detain you, pull you over, and ask you what's going on without a warrant. If you're in a house, then they need a warrant. But if you're in a car, a boat, an airplane, on the ground, whatever, like, they can detain you within 100 miles of the border. And, my cousin, he's been arrested by the Border Patrol. He was down there with some friends right on the border, just laying out water for people who were coming across. And he got detained by the Border Patrol. Wasn't doing anything illegal, but he was held like overnight, and his dad had to go down there and get him out. And I don't know. I mean, this is America. So, when you start cracking down on, let's frame it this way, like, nobody likes terrorists, and we don't want terrorists to, be scheming to kill us. So, I mean, if there's a lead as to, this group of terrorists in some cell, and who they are, and then you apply for a warrant to tap their phones to figure out what they're saying, I don't have any issues with that. But just like the Patriot Act was this massive blanket approval to do that anywhere without any sort of probable cause or anything like that, the MAGA approach to border security is very similar. I mean, first of all, you got tons of land that you're just going to seize and put a giant 50-foot wall, along a 1,200-mile border. And then you are militarizing it too. Like in El Paso, they've had parking lots full of tanks down there. Tanks, for the Mexican border. Talking about drug cartels. Why do you need tanks to take on drug cartels? It's an excuse to pump tons of weapons and ammunition and armor onto the border. And then on top of that, if you have ICE, kind of extrajudicially, like without proper oversight, raiding houses and, just acting like the Gestapo basically and rounding people up and kicking them over the border. I don't know. I don't think that's good. I don't think we should have that in America. I would rather deal with occasional crime from immigrants than creating a massive police state to try to crack down on it. And I think most of the problems with illegal immigration stem from prohibition. Like if it's super hard to get across and work, they're going to do it illegally. If you have to go through all these steps to get these permits, or if you're trying to get a path to citizenship that costs thousands of dollars, they're going to come in illegally. And then if you're working illegally, everyone's trying to keep it under the table and not, let the government see the light of day of what's going on there. So then the working conditions are really bad, and that leads to more crime, just like with anything else, with the drug war, with anything. So I think the war on illegal immigration causes a lot of the problems that we've seen. I mean, the border used to be wide open, even 50 years ago. I mean, comparatively, you could just walk across the desert and come here, and there wasn't near the amount of crime. You think about how much the crime has gone up since the Department of Homeland Security has become a thing over the last 20 years. I mean, it's gotten way, way worse. And I know Connor lives in Arizona. I think you're more northern Arizona, but I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, also, no, but that's the whole thing. I mean, it's one of these situations where, and there's already a lot of government contracts that are laid out in the Clifton piece that Thiel's companies make off of these policies, and it, the profits went up and the contracts went up during the Trump administration, and it's because of these border policies, and it's just, again, it's another aspect of the right wing. Sort of the new right movement where I feel like we're making concessions of things that we're opposed to in principle in order to, I don't know what the strategic advantage is here to bolster people like Blake Masters and these sort of, new right post-Trump MAGA people, or even these Thiel-backed candidates who I just find very suspicious. But I agree with you. I don't pay much attention to the border news and these kinds of things, but I would say that you're probably right.
Yeah, the whole border conversation is I feel like there's so much propaganda surrounding it, and of course all the right wingers say it's just left wing fake news. But I feel like on the right, I've been seeing a lot of the Congress people, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ron DeSantis, all these popular right wing fingers pointing out, oh, there's 300 people a day dying from fentanyl, but I can't find that anywhere. I looked it up from multiple different sources. I can't even find 175 people. I can find 162. I can find 150 a day, but nowhere can I find that that's the leading cause of death for people from 18 to 45, which Ron DeSantis claimed, and then Marjorie Taylor Greene in a tweet said 300 people a day. I can't find it. Is it true? Maybe. I don't know. But like this cold warrior, drug warrior thing, I feel like we're going back to like 2002 all over again.
I am stoked to tell you guys about the show's new sponsor. I am now working with MTS Nutrition, which is a brand that I've believed in for a very long time, and they run awesome sales and they have awesome products. So I want to tell you about their amazing protein powder, which you're going to ask me how many pounds I have of the protein powder, and the answer is all of them. So here I got Red Velvet Cake, 25 grams of protein, and they have the amino acids and everything on there, 59 servings. Peanut butter fluff, Fluffernutter, 26 grams of protein, and then also the chocolate chip cookie, which literally has real pieces of chocolate chip cookie in there. So 27 grams of protein, 180 calories. As I've talked about on the show, getting your protein in is very, very important. So make sure you hit that link below and purchase your protein powder through MTS Nutrition. Boom!
And like you said, we're giving concessions, and I don't know, it's just so Blake Masters deal. It really seemed like all we really gave up was our LP candidate to pat ourselves on the back and have a conversation with Blake Masters. That really seems to be all that it ended up being.
And it was a candidate that Dave did not like. I mean, he said I'm part of the problem. He was trying for over a month or something like this, a month behind the scenes. I was using my weight behind the scenes to try and prevent him from running in the first place. Mm-hmm. So the argument that, well, I waited to, yes, he did not make the endorsement until Victor put his foot in his mouth and said, the age of consent, that should be up for a vote. So on the one hand, that's true. But at the same time, this was a predetermined thing that Dave really liked Masters, and I don't really understand why. I guess he's good on guns. He said some good things about how sound money is honest money. I don't think he'll be in favor of as much spending maybe as Mark Kelly. The problem too with a guy like Masters, again, is he's running on Trump's legacy. We don't really have anything else to really base off of him. I don't think a LouRockwell.com article. Yeah, exactly. He had a poster. I had to do a double take because I thought it was, I was like, no, I must have misread that. It says, are you better off now than you were in 2020? If not, vote for Blake Masters. So
like you could have used like 2019, like of all years, 2020 is a pretty bad year to ask how you were doing. And like, come on, dude. And of course that happened under a Republican too. So and that's another thing that I see with these MAGA cons is just this fucking ridiculous partisan hackery. And honestly, I think it probably cost them a decent bit of votes in the election because people remember getting the cash in hand a couple of years ago, and then all of a sudden everything costs more money. I believe people are pretty stupid, but I feel like Republicans especially aren't that stupid. Like they're pretty dumb. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I work with them, 8 hours a day, but I don't think they're that stupid that those two are so far apart. Pat, I don't know if you got any thoughts there as well.
Well, one thing that I find hard to believe is that conservatives give two shits about drug addicts dying in the gutter. Like, that's just a hard sell for me. Like, there's 300 of the worst lowlifes of our society that are dying every day. We need to stop this. Mm-hmm. I just don't really buy that.
The other thing too, it's like I remember I used to get mad about that with the Trump thing, where it's like, well, we have to really go after these people coming over the border, and like Reed was talking about these Gestapo kind of policies. And it's like, why? Because they're taking government money and they're voting Democrat. All these different things can be, or they're bringing drugs. Like all these different things can be solved by not being sadistic little shits and going after individuals who are just crossing an imaginary. I hate to sound like an evangelical libertarian. Like this is why I stick to foreign policy. But like the point is, they make this deal where they're like, well, I'll support the state brutalizing people because we're never going to end the drug war. Why try that? We're never going to end the welfare state. Why try that? We're never going to reduce the size of government. It's only going to get bigger. So in the meantime, I'd just like to beat up on some Mexicans or something. I mean, I hate to say it, but like, I just don't relate to that mentality. But I mean, we should be focusing on, like you're saying about fentanyl. Obviously, the solution there is to end the war on drugs because, and again, why are people taking opioids in record numbers? Why is that? It's because the government has ruined everything. The oligarchy has destroyed people's futures. They have no hopes and no prospects. And this is a very depressing time to be living in. And as we were talking about earlier, with the cost of living and everything skyrocketing. There's just, imagine the deaths of despair just during the COVID era. I mean, just during the lockdowns. I worked for several restaurants I know that just got destroyed as a result of these policies. We're talking about, we act like there's people getting sick constantly just from big pharma, but these vaccines, let alone these vaccines, nobody talks about it. It's sadistic to just be like, well, it's a good excuse to go out to ramp up the new Cold War with China and to go after people on the border so we can make money for like the immigration control industrial complex or something, instead of addressing these issues that libertarians should never have given up on in the first place. Because they're absolutely right. If we are concerned about people dying and ODing from drugs and getting cocaine laced with fentanyl or something like that. That is something that we should be concerned about. And the way to fix that, obviously, is to legalize drugs so people can get pure stuff and they don't have to worry about all of that.
But that's never going to happen. So you have to pick between the R and the D. And obviously
Seriously.
you have to choose the R.
Yeah, because they're more like us, you know. We're more China hawks than Russia hawks. That's so gay.
America first.
Yeah, America first usually, I think we've all kind of said it in some iteration or another, but it usually boils down to like Israel, then Taiwan, Saudi Arabia, and then Ukraine, and then America. That's usually what it boils down to. But I think it was Reed that called it out that Blake literally had the same reaction as the Biden regime when it came to the war with Russia, where literally as soon as it happened, he said, "Oh, let's go for sanctions." Like it is indiscernible from their proposed worst president in history. He had the same reaction to him. So it's like, okay, well, this is when it matters for you to be good on foreign policy. And if you look amongst all these, all the Republicans, most of them were right in lockstep with it. So I don't know. It just seems like there's this divide amongst libertarians about how much we should focus on foreign policy versus the culture war stuff. And not to say that that's not important, but at the same time, we can't lose what makes us better than the Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, I want to read this. This is from March 1st, 2022. Blake Masters. This is the last tweet in his thread. And when he was on the Liberty Report, and maybe when he was on Part of the Problem too, he tried to act like he had explicitly said we shouldn't send weapons. And maybe he said that somewhere else that I haven't seen, but I personally haven't seen him say that until very recently. He tried to make it sound like he said that in this tweet. So what he said is, what to do? We should supply the Ukrainians as they fight for their country. We should support the Europeans as they get up off their knees. We should sanction Russia so that Putin and his cronies feel the consequences, and we should keep our own military out of this. So that does not sound explicitly to me to, not give them lethal aid. It's vague at best, but we should supply the Ukrainians as they fight for their country. I mean, that sounds like giving them weapons, but I mean, it's just kind of one of those vague things where later down the road, he could go either way with it.
You ever supplied somebody in a fight? You just you stand there with like a first aid kit, just kind of hand it to them as they're fighting somebody, or some food.
Exactly.
No, I mean, he wrote that he's such a little, it's cynical, right? Because it's written, I don't doubt that he wrote it so he could go either way on it. It seems like it's written like that, so that if the winds blew a different way, ultimately with the GOP, or at least the target market for his campaign, then he could say, well, I never intended that. I'm against these arms packages everybody hates. That's the other thing. He said with the NDAA, again, nobody pushed him on the Taiwan Policy Act stuff. No one pushed him on $10 billion over 5 years in military aid for Taiwan, which is now in the Senate's version of the NDAA. Not to mention these wartime buying powers that the Pentagon is seeking, again, for preparation for war with China and to continue supplying Kiev. He doesn't get asked about any of that stuff. And then he says I think he said to Ron Dan, he's like, yeah, the NDAA, I'm sure that bill is filled with, great things. But this Ukraine aid is problematic. The weapons, I never supported that. And as Reed just showed, I mean, also, if you read that full thread, he's basically blaming the invasion on Europe not buying enough weapons. From America,
the rest of it's the narrative. Like, they didn't draw hard enough a line. It's this Don Baldick, approach of like, oh yeah, if we had a real tough guy like Trump who would have really put the hammer down, then nothing would have happened. By the way, I do want to say that with Blake, I think he is better than Kelly, and it's obvious that he understands libertarian thought. So I personally am not opposed to, extorting him into getting an endorsement. So I would have just liked to see I would have liked to seen it done differently. I would have liked to seen Dave or Ron or any of these guys, or even Mark, frankly, tell him, hey, you've said some fucked up shit about this. If you want my endorsement, you've got to change your tune on this now. But none of that happened. It was just, hey, guys, look at how great this guy is. All 3 interviews were just like, yeah, you really are awesome. Tell us how awesome you are. And they just went with it.
Tell us,
with Baldic.
Tell us the story again about how when you were in college, you read Rothbard.
20
I
years
think
ago.
every congressman should read Rothbard. I used to tell my teacher, you don't understand economics. I've been reading this Mises guy. I was that guy.
I just put my son to bed, and we've been doing this thing where I tell him a story every night. And every night it's a different thing. Like one night it was, my son, the fireman, and my son, the airplane pilot. And this was us, Blake Masters telling us a story. Blake Masters, the student of Rothbard. The same thing.
Oh,
in
God, it
every
was
story,
so-
my son, he goes to work and he saves the day.
Mhm.
That's how the stories go.
That's
Yeah,
what
but-
Blake's gonna do.
Yeah,
Exactly.
he's gonna go to the
Be so
Senate. And
big.
he's gonna save. He's gonna go to the Senate and he's gonna save the day. He's gonna be Rand Paul's best ally. But
The only guy that I didn't extort at all to get my support was John Fetterman. That guy got like a full-blown endorsement up front. I mean, I don't even care what his policies are. It's just his delivery is so on point that I was like, this guy just gets it. This is what we need in the Senate. So
Have you guys
that guy just
Have you guys heard people saying that Blake Masters is going to be better than Rand Paul? I've
Oh, yeah.
heard this
Oh, yeah.
a whole who here is pretending? I mean, who anywhere is pretending that your Marjorie Taylor Greene or your Blake Masters or your Joe Kent is any equivalent to like a Thomas Massey?
who is pretending
No
that
one.
Blake Masters is even equivalent to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene voted against sanctions on Russia, and she's been screaming like, not one more cent to Ukraine, and she's made posts about how there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine and shit. So even though she still sucks on a bunch of stuff, at least she has drawn a hard line in the sand about this issue, where Blake, after he's kind of goaded, will finally be like, yeah, I don't think we should send him weapons, and the sanctions were kind of sloppily used. So he's not even as good as her.
Sure. Well,
like,
I guess my larger point, and you're right about that, Reed. But my larger point is like, if we are going to, like, say, if your Mises crowd is going to be supporting these populist right candidates, why aren't we corrupting the Republican Party to get candidates like Thomas Massey and like Rand Paul, instead of harnessing the energy of the populist right figures like this, like your Ron DeSantis?
Right. Well,
and it seems, I mean, go ahead.
Well, a real interesting point, and I tweeted this out when I saw it. Rand Paul and Thomas Massey did like exceedingly well. Like they crushed whoever they were up against. And a certain somebody had tweeted at me and said, well, maybe you should listen to their example. And I completely agreed with him. But the thing is that Thomas Massey never towed the line for Trump, right? He never sat there and fucking took a full-blown he never took a full-blown concussion to the fucking head over sucking Trump's dick, right? Thomas Massey was he was like the only congressman to stand up and say, we should take a vote on this stimulus. You guys should have to come here and fucking vote on it. And that is what separates him from all these fucking MAGA chuds, is that he's willing to stand up to Trump and say, no, I'm not doing this. And then he got told he should be thrown out of the Republican Party. So I feel like there's so much removing of agency from Trump and the Republican base. Like, oh, they're marginally better, but they don't know, or they treat them like retarded children, essentially, where they can do no wrong because they're just not well enough educated. I can't stand that argument, because it really takes away from the fact that Trump supported most of the bad shit that's going on right now.
I really try to, I mean, when I interact with these type of people, I really try to steel man what they're saying, because I sometimes I feel like we're straw manning it at certain times. But from what I've heard as articulated by Jeff Deist, there was an interview where he went on with Tom Woods, and they were talking about the populist right's war with the alphabet soup agencies. And it seems to me that the strongest argument is that no, the the populist right are not libertarians, and that's fine. But what they are they're Jacksonian populists that have declared war against the regime, and as maybe like burn it all down people or what have you, we need a strong man or strongmen type archetypes to get into the ring and to fight the regime. And
Like
even
Herschel
if they're
Walker.
not, and even if they're not, libertarians like us, that's fine, but they're against the regime, which is the biggest danger to libertarianism that we've ever seen. Seems to me to be the real argument.
Yeah, well, you sent that article over to me, and I think I breezed through it, but there was I think it was like the Jacksonian militarism or something like that. Pat,
Yeah.
I think, I
It might have been a
exactly.
Daniel Larison piece or a Ted Snyder piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like they're just kind of getting lazy, and as I've heard Pat articulate, some people are crotchety right wingers, and it's kind of true, and I just find it so intellectually lazy. And then you see they have an obsession, for these people who hate the alphabet agencies. For some reason, they keep getting these FBI and CIA spooks in that are going to run, and they, kind of carry a lot of the same military lines. But I think it was Reed that articulated before that, like, nobody cares if you're against regime change. Like, nobody believes in that shit anymore. But China will be the next big thing. Russia's kind of a big deal, but some of the right's good on that. But like, being against regime change is like being against slavery now. Like, it doesn't take any guts.
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's no line with the populist right where someone's a warmonger anymore. So, someone can have the same military views as Liz Cheney, but as long as they love Trump, then they're a populist right winger. So, Don Baldock is a neocon. I mean, he wants to fight Russia and China. He didn't think we should pull out of Afghanistan. He thinks Putin invaded Ukraine because we pulled out of Afghanistan and we showed weakness. He thinks that the Iranian regime is oppressive because we haven't sanctioned them enough and we haven't, been aggressive against them enough. I mean, literally every neocon talking point he has, but he has that Trump endorsement, and he talks the right way that, attracts the populist right-wingers. So there are a lot of liberty Republicans here in New Hampshire who are telling us we need to vote for Don Baldock. It's like, no, like, fuck you, we're not going to do it. He's a warmonger. They're like, no, he's not a warmonger. And you probably saw that clip of me blasting his own words back at his supporters, about going to war with Russia and China. And I found tons of clips online. Even back several months ago, Corey Lewandowski, a Trump advisor, condemned him as being too hawkish and too dangerous, and that he should never be a United States senator. Jennifer Griffin, the Pentagon correspondent for Fox News, came on the air after he was on and said, hey, just so you guys know, everything he just said does not represent the Department of Defense. That's like absolutely insane. We don't want to do any of that stuff. So, once we start saying Blake Masters is one of us, and then they're like, oh, okay, well, Don Baldock is one of us. Like, we were literally getting that argument from Free Stater, small L libertarians in New Hampshire, that we need to support this guy. But thankfully he lost by a lot. And not that Hassan's any good, but, I think if Baldock had got in there with the amount of quasi-libertarian support he had, there would have been zero accountability once he's in there. Whenever he's pushing for war, we would just kind of ignore it, and it would have been really bad. So it would have been just like when Trump was president. So I'm glad he didn't get in there, because they'll at least hold Maggie Hassan accountable. The right wingers will, and the like liberty Republicans and right-leaning libertarians, they'll at least hold her feet to the fire, where only, like the really strict ones of us, like the four of us, would actually have held Baldock accountable. So I don't know. Once you start loosening that standard, you could go a long way with it, and people will never care.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's so refreshing for me once I found out who, Robbie and Abby Martin were. And Robbie had kind of pointed this out to me, that it really doesn't mean anything to be anti-war in 2022, right? Just because of how watered down it's got, because everybody would point to Trump and say, look how anti-war he is. And, oh, he did all these great things and he was just so anti-war. But it really is almost like a hijacking of the anti-war movement and libertarianism as a whole, because now we kind of get baked in with all these people who actually are completely opposed to some of the stuff that we would like to see in a foreign policy respect, but just because they say they're anti-war and they hate regime change, but they're okay with drone strikes and the Cold War and executing Cuban leaders, as some of these populist right figures have literally said, we're all baked into one. And I really think that it actually waters down the effectiveness of being anti-war. And yeah, I think it was Pat, I think you were the one that made me aware of Anthony Sabatini saying we should execute Cuban leaders, which is like, what?
Hashtag SOS Cuba. Which I think the Libertarian National Party has tweeted out at one point or another.
Yeah, they
Mark
did.
Bueno.
And also, we should never forget, they tweeted right after Biden's speech announcing sanctions on Russia the day after the invasion, or the day of, if you get the time zones matched. As soon as he was done, they tweet out, Taiwan is a country.
Yeah.
As if to say, we're more hawkish than Biden and Trump. And
Also,
Bush and Obama.
Also, please recognize us that we're identifying the very popular political trend of trashing Z or China or something like that. All these Pooh Bear memes about Z, and the Babylon Bee comes out with pieces that sarcastically mock like Uyghurs in concentration camps, and then tweet about how the Palestinians are, I don't know, terrorists or something, and some kind of
Hamas.
A fucking Israel's right to exist, defend itself, something or other. Yeah. But one thing I've been trying to do
anti-Semitic to me.
Yeah. I don't have a bell
Yeah.
here. One thing I've been trying to do though with this, trying to grapple all this stuff about purity versus pragmatism and the populist right, is really just look to the 90s. And because this is nothing new, man. I mean, and I've really, of course, since I'm the Justin Raimondo Fellow at the Institute, I've been trying to look and see what Justin's relationship was like with Pat Buchanan, because Buchanan, and there's notable differences between Buchanan and some of the populist right. But the common strain is that Buchanan was a protectionist and he was a bit of a China hawk. And at times, like during the war in Kosovo, he was saying, hey, we should be bombing China and not Kosovo. and so at the time, the issue hierarchy was different because we weren't in a declared Cold War against China, even though Justin Raimondo said we were in the early 2000s, or at least he predicted it very accurately. But Justin gave the opening campaign speech for Pat Buchanan for, I think, his last presidential run, I think on the reform ticket. And so it's a really difficult road to walk, but Justin never pulled any punches against Buchanan, especially for his China hawkishness. But on the issue of the day, Justin was always right to put the current war or the near future war at the top of his list of things to oppose. And so when Pat Buchanan was proposing that we bomb China instead of Kosovo, Raimondo defended him because he ran antiwar.com, ran a piece where Buchanan was saying, don't bomb Kosovo, bomb China. And he got some, it was just a throwaway line at the end of the piece. Mainly it was all about Kosovo, but there was some rightfully angry fan mail or reader mail that said, hey, why is antiwar.com running this piece? And Justin wrote a whole long response saying, well, we're currently bombing Kosovo and we're not going to be at war with China, although Pat Buchanan is a crazy lunatic and he's wrong about China he is. So I've really just tried and think about what Justin would do. And Justin was a crazy rabid attack dog, and sometimes he bit the wrong people. But trying to look and learn, because this is the whole China issue, and I would argue that China opposing war with China should be issue number 1 or number 2 right now. Maybe below opposing nuclear Armageddon with Russia, but it's a very close second. And it's clearly the next item on the U.S. empire's agenda list and their main priority and focus. But it's nothing new. And I think there's lessons to be learned from the past.
Yeah, I remember Ryan was saying that, the next thing was going to be war with Russia. He was saying this in like the beginning of 2021, and I didn't believe him. I was like, no, man, come on. Like, they're not that stupid. There's no way they'd actually push us to that. And here we are. And I used to feel the same way about the China talk. Like, oh, come on. Like, that'll never happen. But just saw it happen with Russia. So that's why that kind of woke me up to like, well, yeah, no, they could actually do this.
Yeah, it was mostly like Peter Schiff for me that kind of initially turned me on to the China stuff, which sounds dumb, but like I remember just him talking about the large trade deficit that we have with them, and then how for some reason most of the populist right just couldn't let that go. So I'm like, it kind of sounds like we're winning in this whole situation. So what the hell is the deal? And then you start pulling at this thread, and then you find just a lot of BS kind of at the heart of it. And like the only thing that I could really see them just having any kind of solid point on is the whole TikTok mining our information. But it's like, okay, Israel does the same thing to us. The U.S. government already does the same thing to us. What is China going to do with that information? I'm not saying they should have it, but like I think Pat told me once, it's going to be similar to Russia buying ads in 2016 for the election. Like, what's the scale of this, and what actual potential harm is it? Because ramping up Cold War tensions is, very dangerous and civilization if it goes far enough. But what good is it to just say, hey, like we should? I don't know. It's frustrating. Anyways, Connor, you got.
There's such distance too between what the actual policies are in terms of the military and what the American people are and what the American people think is our reality, the reality of our relationship with China. I mean, I don't think most Americans who listen to someone like a Blake Masters or one of these populist right people or Tim Pool that we're talking about, who are very hawkish on China, realize that Biden now has openly deployed U.S. troops to Taiwan, training their local forces for war with China, and that Taiwan is a part of China, and that this is as much of, if not more of a red line for them than Ukraine, that this is absolutely going to lead to nuclear war. Not only that, when they want to talk about, oh, what if that happens and they come to the California coast, it starts with TikTok, and then next thing you know, we're getting invaded. We sail warships at the Taiwan Strait every month. When Biden came in last year, Pat and I wrote about this and talked about this throughout the whole year. These were the largest, not only with Russia and Defender Europe 21 and all these myriad NATO exercises and the ancillaries from that larger exercise and starting these drills like Rapid Trident 21 in Ukraine, Sea Breeze with over 30 nations training for war with Russia in the Black Sea. But in South China Sea, the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, Biden flew over 2,000 sorties of military planes. That's multiple times a day near their coast. Can you imagine if the shoe was on the other foot? We look at he escalated the aircraft carrier strike group deployments with about 10, which was way up from where Trump was. I believe it was like 6 under Trump, and it might have been 9 or 10, but regardless, it was a big escalation over what Trump had done.
If I could jump in here,
yeah.
One thing that we have said so much in talking about this Blake Masters endorsement, I mean, a friendly critique of Dave Smith. When Blake Masters comes and says that China is going to be landing on the California coast, just the very cursory, simplest knowledge of the topic could easily rebuff that talking point in an apocalyptic, decisive nuclear way. Just saying, putting this context that Connor's laying out there shuts that down in a moment, because who's going to believe that when you explain the reality of the situation, right? There is one country who is sailing warships off of the other country's coast, and it's not China off of California. Sorry, Connor.
No, you're 100% right. And then it's, the whole policy, it's just, the ginning up hatred of China and demonization of China is as bad, every bit as bad, if not worse, because a lot of it comes through nominally alternative media and sources that people trust a hell of a lot more than Brian Stelter. Yeah, exactly. And so it's just as bad as what we sat through during the Trump era. And the Russia demonization had started long before that. Very Heavy Agenda is a great documentary about that. But Jesus Christ, people just there's such a gap between what the American people are aware of in terms of our military policy vis-a-vis China, and let alone, the Taiwan Policy Act. Pat wrote a great piece showing that Lindsey Graham and Bob Menendez, possibly the two worst hawks in the Senate, have been leading the charge on both the burgeoning proxy war where we use Taiwan as a human battering ram against China, and certainly what we're doing in Ukraine. And the Taiwan Policy Act, they go, well, it's not like we're going to officially make them a major non-NATO ally, but, de facto, we'll do it with it, it won't be in name, but everything else, we're going to make all the adjustments and just, Jesus, the escalation is just completely off the charts. They're talking about, upgrading their status in all these different international institutions, treating them like it's their own country. We're in major trade talks now with Taiwan. The British trade policy minister just visited. Lithuania just opened a trade office in Taiwan. The whole thing is just absolutely off the charts. And of course, people should have really realized this when the Pelosi incident occurred and Biden made his fourth gaffe, saying that we are absolutely, obligated to go to war with China if they're attacked, which we make exponentially more likely with these policies. Again, it was just like the libertarian movement, what Pat and I have talked about before. It just seems like we're so far behind on this issue overall, whereas instead of boosting somebody like Masters and blowing political capital doing that and risking credibility, we should have been really pushing this issue in parallel with our opposition to the war in Ukraine. And that's the divide we're getting at earlier that you were talking about, Kyle, with the focus on foreign policy versus people who are more across the board. They're focused on other issues too, and they kind of see it as at parity with other issues. I'm not a political guy. I'm not, the bureaucracy of the party is making me sleep just thinking about it. But what they should do is focus on anti-war activism for at least more than 50% of everything that the party does. Because right now, we don't know how much time we have left. And there are protests throughout Europe against inflation, the cost of living increases, the economic war against Russia, and this proxy war and the risk of nuclear war. That is the most basic populist thing that the Libertarian Party could be organizing right now, or the Libertarian movement, writ large could be doing. And guess what? Everybody can agree on that. And you can totally bypass all of the political, BS and noise and just get to people and talk to them, because these are bread and butter. These are, these are, what do you call it? Kitchen table issues. This is what everybody can relate to is, look at your gas, look at your food prices, look at your rent going up, look at your savings being depleted. We can stop this and we can get this sword of Damocles, this nuclear war gun to our head. We can stop all this, but we need to do it now. And that should be the main message we have. And I think it would unite. If we're going to try and recruit people from the right or recruit people from the left, the best way to do that is to just be, the most based anti-war movement you can be. That would appeal to the right, and you talk about the Fed and you talk about the federal police and you go after these, because we do have common enemies, but we don't have to waste time with this culture war crap or make a bunch of concessions ourselves. We can just show people a better alternative, which was really Ron Paul's whole mission to begin with. I just heard him talking about that again on the Liberty Report the other day. Our job is to present a better alternative than what these two parties are presenting, because right now it should be a slam dunk. But yeah, I think everybody's getting a little frustrated because it seems like we're just kind of like moving at a snail's pace or something when it seems like they're escalating on so many fronts. We're getting closer to war with Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. And we have U.S. troops.
2% of the vote's pretty good. That's
yeah, man. And it's like, but we have U.S. troops in Ukraine, which is why I have to laugh when the Pentagon admitted that just a week or two ago. Oh, it's just on-site weapons inspections. You know how it is.
What's up, everybody? We're going to take a quick break and tell you about the show's sponsors. We are brought to you by LMNT Electrolytes. I've been using this stuff for years, and what I've honestly found is that if I didn't have electrolytes before some kind of cardio, and sometimes even before workouts, that my workout performance, or definitely cardio performance, would suffer greatly. Sodium is responsible for every single movement pretty much in your entire body, and let's say you drink a lot of caffeine like I like to do, then maybe it is a good idea, like I do every single morning, put some LMNT chocolate electrolytes there in your coffee to get a little bit more sodium, potassium, and magnesium in your coffee, so that way whatever diuretic effect you get from the caffeine is pretty much diluted by the fact that you put chocolate salt in it. Also, it tastes really, really good. Get some chocolate cream or hazelnut cream or even coconut, and mix that all up. It tastes really, really good. So yeah, make sure you drop by, go to drinklmnt.com/inlibertyandhealth and pick you up some electrolytes today. All right, guys, thanks.
It doesn't matter if Blake Masters or some of these guys are like, well, I don't support sending troops there. Well, guess what? They're there. Like, so what if you're against it? I don't support, arming them. Well, you support the sanctions. You support what tell us what you don't support, and we can find out what we agree on. There's just too many glaring problems here where it's like we need to just be a lot better than these people and take away their votes and their base and peel off their supporters, because otherwise we're just fighting a losing battle. I don't even know what we're trying to get. Pats on the head.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, by the way, I just wanted to interject where he was talking about how these right-wing news sources are ones that people tend to trust more. With the Gulf of Baldock incident where, he was attacked by nobody. Epoch Times, I believe, put an article out, and so did Breitbart, and so did National Review. A bunch of different right-wing sources just off of complete bullshit. This story, General ducks punch in would-be assault or whatever, and then others, I think, they said that he was punched. And on Sean Hannity's show, Sean Hannity said, so you ducked a punch. It must feel kind of scary, but I guess you're a general who's seen 10 tours, so you're probably used to that. And he was like, yeah, it's a good thing law enforcement was there to protect me or whatever. So the right-wing news media is just as full of shit as the left-wing media is. We just kind of saw it firsthand a couple weeks ago, so that was just kind of funny.
I just love how he's like, earlier, he's like, no, I wasn't assaulted. Then Handy's like, you're a general. This guy took a swing at you. And then Baltic is just like, yeah, I know. But thank God the cops were there. Otherwise, I would have had to put up the dukes myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And Reed, I think you said that even I tried to watch one Tim Pool episode, but I don't think I caught it. But I think he was even parroting that. And this kind of goes to something that I kind of wanted to hit on with all you guys as well. We're calling Tim Pool our greatest ally, and I just hate this idea that we have to bow down and suck his penis when he clearly shows that he's willing to ally with just all the MAGA people and will throw libertarianism to the wind at the slightest, ruffle in the water. I mean, the dude fucking had Steve Bannon on. He has Jack Posobiec on like every other week. Like, these people have called, Steve Bannon called for regime change in China. He wants war with Iran, and you could probably say he wants war with China. And I've talked about it a little bit where all his funding's from, not all of it, but a lot of his funding's from a fucking shady CCP dissident who's been accused of raping people. He's arrested on his boat, who he tried to pawn off on his daughter. It's just so much shady shit. And we're supposed to believe that these people are, these good, wholesome people. And on top of that, the whole We Build the Wall fund, where they defrauded people, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but nobody will talk about that. And it's kind of like a similar deal with Alex Jones, where he really fucked up. And yeah, there should have been something done, but obviously they're going to the nth degree to make an example. Just the idea that he's, some kind of libertarian, if we can just convince him. I think he's kind of told us, I'm not going to be convinced, but I'll give the libertarians a little pat on the head every here and there whenever they need it. But, really my main goal is to, take concussion from Trump's penis. That seems to be the general goal that he's
Is that what happened to Fetterman?
He probably had more than one.
I stand. I support fracking. I don't support.
Support fracking.
He's the best. I would be proud if I were you, Kyle. By the way, being from Pennsylvania, you should really own that one. Like I wouldn't run from that if I were you. But yeah, I mean, even if Tim Pool's our greatest ally, at least he hasn't attacked the USS Liberty like our other greatest ally. But yeah, I mean, I don't have any issues with people being friendly with him and going on his show, and I don't think people need to be hostile toward him or anything. But I don't think that filleting people ultimately makes them respect you either. Like I think if you're just kind of coming to them on your hands and knees, and if you do something they don't like and just like, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't think in the end that they think more of you because of that. And I remember when Dave went on and Tim Pool brought up that China, I forget exactly what he said, something about China invading the United States, and Dave basically laughed in his face. It was like, dude, that's so ridiculous. Why are you worried about the CCP when you've got the FBI? Which was the right response. But then Angela McArdle was tweeting out like, oh my God, Tim Pool is so anti-war, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, I don't know, why do that? Like, he obviously isn't. He said dumb shit and Dave had to correct him on it. And he was also correcting him on the Abraham Accords and stuff, which to me, that's what you should do if you're on there.
Palestinians.
Yeah, like if you're on there, you should be calling him on his shit instead of like, oh, you're so great, Tim. Oh, and I think in the end, it'll pay off to confront people and tell them who you really are and what you really think instead of trying to cozy up to them. Because if you cozy up to them, they know they're in charge of the relationship instead of you. And I don't think it, I don't think it leads to a mutual respect scenario.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the best argument I've heard on the Tim Pool thing from the other side, because I basically agree with Pat when it comes to Tim Pool and you guys and what you're saying. People just will say that, look, I mean, the guy has this huge platform and he's had all these libertarians on there. I think it would be more valuable, though, for people to go and do basically what Scott did, which is go on there and not be a prick about it, but really to kind of fight the guy about these things that he's horrible on, because it really does expose him. And quite frankly, I mean, his audience evidently thought Scott was a communist, which is ridiculous in his antiwar.com sweatshirt. But it would be great, if Dave, there's a lot of other things that he could point out, like we were just talking about Biden and Trump's policy, but he could blame it all on Biden. I don't care. Blame it all on the Democrats. Blame the whole thing on Obama, the whole Asia pivot, and Hillary Clinton, for Christ's sake. Do that and fight this guy from the right, and then just say, why do you support their whole new Cold War with China? We can all agree that Biden's Ukraine policy is threatening all of us in nuclear war, and this is completely ridiculous. I don't know how good Tim Pool is on the proxy war in Ukraine, but I'm pretty sure he and Luke have shown some pretty good skepticism toward it and criticized Biden. But like, you could just turn the whole thing around and just say like, yeah, we totally agree on that, and that's why you got to be better on this one, and just kind of hammer that home. So I mean, I never would say like don't work with this guy. But I mean, I do think that there's a real problem, like you're getting at, Kyle, when if there's too much of an endorsement, I shouldn't use that word, but if there's too much, it appears like this guy is one of us. Like, I hate that kind of attitude about it, because the guy is so bad on the most important things, and so to just say that and to give him this de facto seal of approval, it sends the wrong message, not only to his people, but certainly to our people, who again need to be, like I said, our movement needs to catch up to the Pentagon on this new Cold War with China. And we need to be outpacing people like Biden and not waiting until something starts in Taiwan the way it did in February in Ukraine before we actually start making noise about this as a movement. I think it should be, like you're saying, we can't wait any longer. So,
the one,
and he undermines that too on the other side. There's not enough focus at the same time that this guy is being marketed as one of us and a great source for news. And then you go to his show, and 9 times out of 10, when our guys aren't on there, he's got Steve Bannon or Jack Posobiec or Yamini Park or Falun Gong or whoever the fuck it is. So
this was like when I first started picking on Tim Pool, I guess you could say, or really dissecting what he was saying about China, the Mises Caucus was putting out these memes. They would have quotes of people who weren't necessarily Mises affiliated, but they put out a meme of a Tim Pool quote and put the Mises Caucus branding on it.
Right.
And I guess my biggest point was like, guys, Mises Caucus, like, don't go to Tim Pool for your news. Like,
to be fair, they also did that with General Sherman. Did you see that one?
No, I didn't. I don't even know who that is.
General Sherman from the Civil War.
Oh, from the Civil War?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you were talking someone recent.
No, like the Butcher of Georgia, that guy.
Yeah, Sherman's March to the Sea.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I was just saying, like, and these are some other things. It's like just frustration from our side of people in LP leadership not utilizing the resources that they have within the movement and going to them to help them form their opinions on these issues that they don't specialize in is incredibly frustrating. I mean, especially when you have a resource like the crown jewel of the liberty movement is antiwar.com. And if we have that resource, which is arguably better, could go toe to toe with any of the most elite foreign policy resources on the planet, and we're not utilizing that resource, we'd rather go to Tim Pool for our foreign policy opinions than go to antiwar.com. That is what I have a problem with. And personally, like, I mean, I've been pretty hard on Tim Pool in the past. I don't know what the guy responds to, because I still listen to Tim Pool, and he was just saying the other day, there's all these people who Elon Musk banned from Twitter because they impersonated Elon Musk. But there's this inner drama between Tim Pool and people like Elijah Schaffer, who Tim Pool says he's invited on to Timcast to have a talk about it. So even if we were like dunking on the guy, maybe our stature is not large enough to warrant that be an invite to hash it out. But I think that Tim Pool is one of the guys that he has thick skin. He responds, and he would invite people on to duke it out if there's a disagreement. So, I mean, hopefully one of us, Dave DeCamp.
I almost ended up on the show over the McCain tweet, which caused all sorts of hell over there. So, yeah.
And I do agree with you, Reed, that the Timcast news article about LPNH was very fair. It was one of the fairest shakes that you guys got. So
I like the Jerusalem Post's articles about us personally, but
they're the best.
Yeah. Well, actually, one thing that I really enjoyed, I think I said Pat over this clip, but Pete Quinones was on Timcast, and it was so interesting to watch him break down the whole China situation, and they just walked right past it. Like, they acted like he didn't say anything.
And he talked for like 3 or 4 minutes.
Yep.
I think that was and it was right at the end of the show too. So I don't know if they jumped right to plugs after that, but Pete gets on, and he's the biggest, baddest, like, right winger you ever fucking saw. And he says, and the topic of China comes up, and he's like, I ain't scared of no communist Chinese. Like, it was great.
No, it was phenomenal. And he just showed all the economic problems that China has, and just how their military is not a threat to us at all. And but that's that strategy, what Scott did and what Pete did, that's what we're talking about. That's what we would like to see. Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. I mean, I'm pretty cynical about the guy. I'm not sure he can be converted. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's kind of set in his ways, and he's decided that he's going to be, a loud voice, echo chamber for this stuff about, Uyghur death camp, rape, assembly lines, and all kinds of stuff. But at the same time, it's very useful to throw people up there to debate him about it, or to just talk to him about it.
Yeah, one of my biggest issues with him is just the pure omission of Trump's foreign policy. And it's something that, obviously all partisan people do. And he just likes to toe the MAGA line without criticizing Trump at all. And he wants to play both sides, right? Oh, if you look on his Twitter bio, it literally says disaffected liberal. Well, at what point are you no longer a disaffected liberal, and are you a Republican, right? Because Tulsi Gabbard's doing the same kind of thing, where she's endorsing just straight up and down MAGA on the ticket. but she's still, a Democrat who left the Democratic Party. Well, once again, at what point do we say you're no longer that? You're now a MAGA child. And if you are, I don't have a problem with that. But it's just like, you don't want to lose. You want to play both sides. You don't want to hook yourself to an ideology and say, this is where I stand. This is what I stand for. And I'm not backing down from that. It's like they just don't want to accept that they're a part of this fucking stupid MAGA Republican cult.
I don't know. I believe Tulsi Gabbard that she endorsed Chuck Grassley to, de-escalate tensions with Russia and China and try to stop us from entering World War III. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, totally legit.
I think Tim Pool is a very smart guy, and not to circle it back to Tim Pool, but I think he's a very smart guy, and I think that all of these positions are calculated. And I don't mean to call him disingenuous. If it sounds like that, I don't know. Maybe it's the business that he's engaged in. But obviously, he has a brand, and he's figured out how to attract a huge following. And he's done that with what is the currency, the commodity of his business is his opinion and his branding. And I think that when it comes to the truth of the issues, I think that is an ancillary thing. What the real thing is his currency and the good that he is marketing, which is the opinions. And it doesn't necessarily matter if those opinions are right or wrong or accurate, just that they're presented in the right way and sold to the biggest market where he can be successful. And in the process, in the art of doing that, he is a genius, because the results speak for themselves. I mean, clearly. So I guess it's a compliment sandwich. Like, he's a genius on doing what he does, but what he does is kind of grifty.
He's tapped into a bunch of different markets by doing that too.
Yeah, he has.
And it's just libertarians, right wingers, MAGA people, conservatives. I mean, he casts a wide net. And yeah, I agree with you. Like, I mean, I don't know what kind of money he's making, but can you imagine being like, do I have to like stop having Bannon and these huge China hawks on, or fight with them every time I bring them on here about
He's
the
not
thing
gonna
I've been
do that.
agreeing with them with forever?
Oh my God. Have you seen how much money they get in super chats? I mean, it is ridiculous. So, and all the people are completely in line with it. Like, yeah, when like you said, when Scott went on, they were all fucking dogging on him. So I don't know, for him to change his mind, it's one of the saying I've heard in the nutrition realm a lot is it's hard to get a man to believe something when his whole salary depends on him not believing it. So I get it, but at what point, when you say you're anti-war, but you're carrying all the pro-war people's talking points and all their water, are you no longer an anti-war person? Like I said, it's just essentially lies by omission, which I can't stand that. I can't stand this idea of trying to whitewash the evil that our government has done. And I see so many Republicans doing this, and I got into a Twitter spat with some Republicans, post-libertarians, over saying that, hey, people who say that there were no wars under Trump, like, you should probably like at least inform them. I was told it's a very progressive notion, which is silly to me, but just the idea that, when you go to the voting booth or who you're supporting, you should know, like, hey, this is the bad, this is the good, you decide. It's not, we just tell them, oh, well, under Trump it was all sunshines and ponies, or, even under Biden it was all, peace.
No. It's just the spending of the last 22 months that has given us all this inflation, Kyle.
Strictly 22.
Yeah, 22. That's a specific number. But
You remember how great 2020 was?
it was awesome. Yeah, we've made a few tweets from LPNH like, if the Republicans win, maybe things will go back to the way they were in November 2020. And it's some
Bet you miss
dumbasses
it.
are even commenting like, oh, you guys are Republican shills now. It's like, read the tweet again. Think about it. November 2020.
And I'll just say with, speaking of LPNH, I think that it seems to me that one of the things that's so great about you guys is that you've learned from the Trump era and taken actually kind of the good things about it, which is, not playing by the old rules and antagonizing people and causing controversy and getting your name into the media by putting up a tweet with Meghan McCain crying and celebrating it, because quite honestly it's something worth celebrating.
Amen.
Or any of these things that you guys are doing, I just think it's great. I think you guys are by far the most social media savvy, ancillary of the movement at this point. And, I think it's actually worked out where it's not like none of that shit actually hurt us, I don't think. And what we're seeing is basically that, I think it was so great you guys walking around like you were doing, replaying his clip on Fox News to his own audience. Even, God damn it, even the Gulf of Balduke incident really does reveal how big of fucking liars these guys are. And it's just, they're really, people I think are a little hesitant or reluctant to admit that this strategy seems to be working, because it seems very unorthodox. It seems like it's, pressing people's buttons and getting people, freak out within like the Beltway. But to be honest with you, I don't care if Justin Amash is offended or some of these, Beltway libertarian types. I've never cared what the editors at Reason think about, what the, I don't know. Etiquette and different things like that. It's off limits. You shouldn't say that. That's reprehensible. I don't care. I think whatever works. People are throwing things at the wall right now to see what sticks. And we're seeing some great success from LPNH, and I think people can learn from that. It's good because, what we saw with Trump, a lot of people like him just because he was a shit stirrer. Those were actually, apart from him being a mass murderer of children and a guy who just, spent more money than Obama, or created a bigger government than we even had under Obama. The funny thing about him was what he would actually do in the media, getting under the skin of people like Jeb Bush and people like Hillary Clinton and like the liberal establishment, and frankly the right-wing conservative establishment. And honestly, I think we need to get under the skin of some of these MAGA people who are just as hawkish as the people that they seemingly overthrew. I love when people are like, well, Trump came in and destroyed the neocons or whatever. That's not true. It's just a rebrand. And whether or not it's like, I'm not saying it's a big conspiracy theory or anything, but the fact that like James Woolsey and Frank Gaffney, people like this, Elliot Abrams, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, the fact that they all lined up with him, those are straight up neocons. So it's not, and his policies reflect neocon interests. Amping up the new Cold Wars of Russia and China, taking on or ripping up the Iran deal, escalating sanctions, and nearly going to war with Iran. Setting records for bombing all these different countries like Somalia, Afghanistan, Yemen. And like you're saying, Kyle, like these are things that I don't think really the so-called, populist right or the America First right has really come to terms with. Right. It would really mean a hell of a lot if they did, if they said that, if they basically called out their guy for all of that stuff and said, we're going to do it differently. We're going to take the good things and the things that we like. And it might even be stuff that we don't support on the domestic front or in the economic front. But if they could be good on foreign policy, man, that would be such an achievement. But right now, I feel like we're kind of deceiving ourselves by getting the cart before the horse and assuming that they're just so much better than they really are now.
Do you guys think that MAGA might die now, though? Because they got pummeled in the midterms. And, a lot of the candidates that Trump vouched for just really didn't do well. And here in New Hampshire, every candidate he endorsed lost. And that's not just here, that's happened all across the country.
Pennsylvania.
Maybe his time has come. Like maybe that's it. Maybe he's done. I think that would be a good thing, because I don't think he necessarily compels people to be better. He's just kind of, he almost puts the blinders on for a lot of people.
He puts people into a sense of complacency. That's kind of what I've always thought with Republicans, is that they're in a sense of complacency, that he didn't start any new wars and he's not Obama, so we might as well just chug along with him. The only thing that concerns me, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the thing that concerns me about, the right-wing base moving on from Trump is now the likelihood of DeSantis being in there is way, way up. And make no bones about it, that dude is a die-in-the-wool fucking neocon. He's a CIA spook as well. There's plenty of shady shit that goes on there. And yes, he was good on one issue. That's it. So does that mean he gets a...
You know who was better than him on that one issue?
Christy
Who also did really well in his re-election campaign? Rand Paul.
Yeah.
So my question is, like, could there be a realignment taking place here? Like, if Trump is done, you have the guy in Congress who stood up to Fauci, and you have the guy who was a governor who stood up to Fauci. What if they both become... I mean, I know Rand has the charisma of a mudflap, so, you know, he's got a lot working against him. But, I mean, we all have gripes with Rand, but if he became the face of the Republican Party, that's a huge upgrade from, you know, where it has been, for sure. Yeah. I don't know if that could happen, but, you know, I think it's possible.
I don't know if he... Yeah, it's kind of interesting because over the last couple of years, he really kind of has risen to be a superstar. And when it comes to, like, the Fauci stuff, because I mean, millions of views, everybody's waiting for those clips to come out where he was tearing him a new one. Honestly, if that is the future of the Republican Party, I'm very, very optimistic in that regards. Although, you know, make no bones about it, Rand isn't perfect on foreign policy, but leaps and bounds better than mostly everybody else. If that's the new face, I'm all for it. I just don't foresee that being it. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I think it's...
I feel like since the Republicans like just got kind of doused in cold water because they thought, oh, red wave, we're going to absolutely murder everybody and take over everything, and they just didn't. Maybe, you know, maybe we can insert some energy here, like, hey, look at these guys who did really well, because Rand Paul even tweeted something out about how he and Thomas Massey and like every liberty-leaning Republican won by huge margins. So maybe we can try to goad the Republicans in that direction. I don't know.
Yeah, and we got a race too, because if DeSantis is, I mean, they've been saying on TV all day, and I'm sure you guys have seen online, that DeSantis is now taking over the Republican Party. Trump's era is over. It's DeSantis. And if they do go back to DeSantis, that's a full revert back to the George W. Bush foreign policy. I mean, on virtually everything, it would be awful. And there's no way we can let that happen. I'm not saying he'd be worse than Biden, but there's no way he'd be better. I mean, and so, yeah, we're in a huge race right now. And so that's the thing, like, build the leverage now. And I don't know how to do it. I'm not, you know, a political strategist, but there's got to be a way right now. And I think if you lead with the foreign policy issues, and then if you just take, you know, so if you, I guess you could talk about the COVID issues. And really, another thing I think is very important, I don't know much about it, but I think we should raise some hell about vaccine injuries, because it seems like it's an issue that's tailor-made for our movement. I mean, the liabilities, the corporatism, big pharma, the fact that it was mandated, that people couldn't go back to work, people could go outside unless they got injected with this experimental concoction that's, you know, I mean, it's killing people, giving people all kinds of health problems. We don't even know what the real effect of this is. So the long-term effect, I should say. But somebody should be the political, you know, the biggest voice for this on the American political stage. And I think we should do that, obviously, with the anti-war movement. If you want to do that, the Fed and this issue, plus, you know, the stuff that we're all so good on, and that is very important to us, you know, cops, drugs, you know, taxes. I mean, we could really make an impact, because there's the right wing. Yeah, you're right. I mean, if they're split right now, then this is our opportunity to come back and, again, I guess, learn from the Ron Paul movement. But I think we got some real momentum behind us now, but we shouldn't cede any of it to these people who are corrupted. And yeah, we should follow Massey and Rand Paul and guys like that. I mean, this would be, but make them better, or just, you know, make a stronger version of that movement. And that's really the move here. And again, just the war in Ukraine and this China stuff and inflation seems to me like a really winning.
Yeah.
I mean,
and then, dude, Rand, also the guy who blocked the 40 billion to Ukraine. So, like, I mean, I'm not against, you know, deifying Rand as, I mean, even though we have issues with him, like deifying him to the Republicans, like, hey guys, here's your guy. You know, this is the guy who stood up to Fauci, and he also stood up to the 40 bill to Ukraine, because that's popular with a lot of Republicans. You know, DeSantis wasn't as good on either of those issues. Like, I mean, he was a governor, so it's a little bit different. But Rand was against COVID restrictions in April of 2020, you know, like right as everything was coming out. DeSantis, it was like a whole year later before he really started getting any recognition for it. So I don't know, maybe there's like some goading we can do there. I just wish Rand was like a foot taller and smiled occasionally and wasn't such a jackass all the time. But
yeah. So one interesting thing I wanted to get you guys' opinion on, because I saw this come up. Somebody said that we shouldn't focus on the minor foreign wars and we should focus on the war on the unborn. And I think
it was Andrew from Popular Liberty.
Yeah. To me, that was one of the silliest things I ever read. But it is also a microcosm of the idea that we need to focus on the culture war stuff. So, and like I said, I feel like there's a place for it, and you have people for it. I don't know what the percentage, what the divide is. So, I guess I'll throw it over to Pat first. Where do you think the proper balance lies of culture war versus foreign policy?
I don't know. I'm not a culture warrior. I mean, I really am a thin libertarian. I've always been a thin libertarian. Now, personally, I'm conservative. I have conservative values. I was raised as a conservative. But I just don't. One thing I despise, and one thing the Bible teaches, is to not point out the speck in another's eye and not notice the log in your own eye. And I try to think about that a lot when I live my life. And I just detest it when people think that, when they judge other people for things that they do themselves, the hypocrisy of that, and for thinking that you should use the state to enforce your own social values on another person. I just find that abhorrent. And I think that people should live the best life that they can and set a good example. And that's just my opinion. I have my feelings about how people should spend their money and how they should raise their kids and how they should do things. But I mostly keep that to myself, because God knows I'm not perfect. And I don't think that anyone advocating these values is perfect either.
Yeah, I would just say that I totally agree with what Pat's saying. And that's the thing too, like, that's, you know, taken aside in the culture war in and of itself, actually, you know what I mean? In a good way, not in a binary kind of a way. You know, the other thing too is there's some libertarians, like I remember Nick Gillespie, I think Dave covered this on his show, his response to you know, some of these, like the lady who was elected in Italy, talking about her speech about what's been happening to the culture, was to say that these nationalists and these conservatives are what do you say? They can't handle libertarian modernity, like taking ownership of the way the culture is now in America, which is just completely backwards. We should not be doing that. But at the same time, I don't see the value in lining up with China hawks who are really good on like fucking transvestite story hour, because I don't care. I honestly don't care about transvestite story hour. I've never seen it. I've heard about it from libs of TikTok, but I muted that account because I don't care about these fucking stories. Do I think it's weird? Yeah. Do I think the parents taking their kids there are fucked up? Yeah. Do I really care about it beyond that? No. You know, because I don't know. I mean, I'm like Pat was saying, I'm reading antiwar.com every day. I don't have time to care about those kinds of issues about some lady in blue hair who thinks she is 6 genders at the same time. It depends on what day of the week it is. Like, that's great. I think that's, I just, that people hate that and are frustrated. And they're like, oh, this doesn't make sense to me.
I think we should prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law.
I think so too. We have too many priorities to get through first, but someday, yes.
Well, when we do get, I mean, if we do get down to the nitty gritty of it, like maybe this will get some respect from the post libs. I do think it should be illegal to take children to drag queen shows, where there's like actually explicit things like that. Now, but I'm not going to sit here and say there aren't
statist. No, I'm just kidding.
Important First Amendment considerations, especially when it comes to like public schools and public spaces and people and things like. So I do have nuanced opinions about this, but at the same time, like I also have been cautioning about like the idea of a moral panic, because I have sensed that within the last year, and that can easily turn into a witch hunt type situation.
Yeah, it really seems like it's almost artificially propped up. I was messaging Robbie about this, like it just all of a sudden in the last year just came out of nowhere, and you're seeing it everywhere. And I think I really don't think it's like a majority. It is like a super small minority of people who take their kids to that stuff. And I think literally all reasonable people agree, like, that's fucking disgusting. And
there was a lady in New Hampshire. Did you see that going around on Twitter? Kathleen Cavallaro or whatever her name was. She lost. So she just got beaten. But she wanted government funded drag queen story hour. And she made a big thing about it. It was really weird, and she lost. So
so Reed, your opinion on where the line should be drawn between culture warrior and foreign policy stuff.
Well, I mean, I am a culture warrior, but just I try to draw the lines in a different way. So like I mean, through the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire, we have created a culture of like fuck the warmongers instead of like fuck. I mean, we make fun of the liberals too, and we make fun of the conservatives on some stuff, but it's mostly like fuck these warmongering pieces of shit. Like that's the biggest amount of angst you get from us. And then we'll talk about guns, and we'll talk about I don't know, other stuff. We'll make fun of the liberals for being woke or whatever. But at the end of the day, foreign policy is obviously the most important thing. And if you put it right in the middle and you make it super important and you put it at the forefront, then I don't think you even have to worry about offending people with your cultural stuff, unless you've got like really, really wacky shit for what you think. But if you've got, like, if you're a conservative and you're super, super anti-war, I think someone like Abby Martin is going to be more impressed with you just because you're so anti-war. So like Abby Martin thinks some really weird shit socially. Like, I mean, she's kind of out there. But I don't care because she's so good on the war stuff and the spying stuff and, like all the really important stuff. So I feel like that kind of gives you the ability to reach across the aisle. And the same with conservatives too. Like if you're, if there's an anti-war conservative, he'll be able to look past the legalizing drug stuff and the legalizing sex work or whatever. If you're just really solidly truthful about what it is you believe about war, I think people just have more respect for you, and the culture war becomes less of an issue almost.
I'll just add, hating people like John McCain, I think, is a great thing for the culture.
Yeah.
It's seriously
bipartisan.
When I say I'm not into the culture war or whatever, it's because I am thinking of it as this binary that we've grown up in and as it's accelerated. But seriously, having someone like Abby Martin around and making her a huge name in the country would be a fantastic win from my point of view in the culture war. Making antiwar.com a huge, website, like expanding its reach tenfold would be a major victory in my culture war, the culture war that I would support. Hating the Federal Reserve, again, as much as it was hated during the Ron Paul Revolution, and more so, that would be a huge win for the culture war. Supporting freedom in these things, and civil liberties, and hating chicken hawks, and hating central bankers, and hating cops, and hating the FBI and the NSA and the CIA, and the military industrial complex. That's fucking awesome for the culture. But that option is not being presented to us as one, either the Coke or Pepsi that we are able to choose from. It's either Drag Queen Story Hour or Andrew from Popular Liberty or something like that. You know what I mean?
That's a pretty, that's, I couldn't think of a better binary way to lay it out. So yeah, if I think we've all had our disagreements, and probably a lot more agreements than disagreements with LP leadership. And I know that we pretty much all have their ear, but I kind of want to give everybody a open floor to tell them what you think the main thing that we should be focusing on right now, because it seems like even after the takeover, it doesn't seem as like strong as it was kind of marketed. So I guess we'll start. Reed, you can go first, and then Pat, and then we'll throw it over to Connor.
Yeah, so I want to see punching up instead of punching down and punching at each other. So at Libertarian Party in New Hampshire, we rarely are actually picking on other libertarians or like fighting with other libertarians or punching down at useless people. It's usually, oh shit, LPNH made it into the news again because they said this about whatever, you know. I'd like to see a lot more of that type of stuff. You know, Dave going on Rogan and getting millions of views talking about the war in Russia, or the war in Ukraine. Like, I think that type of stuff, great. Like, I want to see more and more of that. There seems to be still like a lot of people give a shit what Archie Flower thinks. Like, who cares? Like, just ignore him, block him, move on. I want to see people causing chaos with the machine instead of like in the party. There's so much chaos in the party, and it's just so dumb and not worth the time. Also, this might be controversial, but I think people who want to win soon should run as Republicans. I'm actually probably going to do that myself in New Hampshire. I'm going to run for state representative soon, and I'm going to do it as a Republican. And I think the Libertarian Party has an important role that it can play. But I think if people have a vision of like becoming the first libertarian U.S. senator, I don't think it's going to happen for a long time. So, and I also don't think a lot of people are going to be able to get elected as a Republican U.S. senator. You know, like, start thinking locally. Start thinking about how you can use your local Libertarian Party to activate people to get involved with, you know, even if it's with the local Republican Party, if you're allowed to do that in your state or whatever, and try to get things moving at a local level and try to shift the culture, try to, you know, activate people into doing something. I'd like to see more. I'd just like to see more action. Like, it seems like it's pretty stagnant. There's a lot of infighting and nothing's really happening. So push that energy outward to fight with the actual enemy and kind of mobilize people into doing things on the ground, I guess, is what I'd like to see.
Cool. Yeah, Pat?
Well, you mentioned earlier that you feel like everyone on this call has some kind of connection or sway to libertarian leadership. I don't believe that's the case with me, and I think maybe it's my fault for not trying to reach out more aggressively, but I don't think that libertarian leadership necessarily really cares what I have to say. So I wish that was different, but that's just the way it is.
Oh, and you don't have anything you think that you would like to see him do, or?
Well, I think they should read antiwar.com. They should actually read it.
Yeah.
Based.
Yeah.
That would be my number one suggestion. They should be reading antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute. And I think actually a great thing for the movement would be for Dave Smith to talk to Pat about China.
Or Dave DeCamp.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, seriously. I've been saying we need to get Dave, Kyle, and Pat on the show for a while. But you know, I think the primary thing is you look at what matters to people. And so if you look at Europe, you look at these protests, and I've written a few articles about this for antiwar.com. And if you look at what's going on in the Czech Republic, if you look at the protests in France, Germany, you know, the common thread that's uniting the left and the right and people throughout Europe, you know, whether they're union workers, farmers, right wingers, left wingers, poor people, you know, whatever, it's all against inflation, and it's against the sanctions, and it's against the proxy war. And what's happening to cost of living, what's happening to energy prices, and all these different things. So I think that our move has to be to focus on foreign policy, namely Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And you can extrapolate with Iran. You can make that all about getting out of the Middle East once and for all. Stop supporting Israel, stop supporting Saudi Arabia, stop supporting all these Gulf dictatorships, Egypt, and get out of Yemen, get out of Syria, get out of Iraq, lift all the sanctions on Syria, and these other countries, and make sure that we're not at economic war with anybody, that we're trading with people, that we have peace, that we have diplomacy, that we have free exchange, culture exchange, all these different things. And if you want to say we're going to lead by example, we have a lot of catching up to do in terms of our moral fiber, but I think we can still manage to do that, the American people. And but the truth is, I think we have to focus on foreign policy, inflation, and if you want to, it's like a 1, 2, 3 thing. I guess you should. It's tough because there's so many other things, but I would just go with I would have to say the Federal Reserve. Just go back to doing the Ron Paul method, because right now would be the best time to do that with the economic crisis. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's a layup. So right now, restart the End the Fed movement and really start an anti-war movement over this proxy war with Russia, and make sure that people are alerted to what's going on with Taiwan, and get the U.S. I want U.S. out of the South China Sea to be a slogan that's known all over the country. That's what needs to happen. And then I would say defer to Jeremy Kauffman and guys like Reed on how to get social media attention, and not worry about ruffling the feathers of whatever, like I said, the editors of Reason or
the Jerusalem Post.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you're pissing them off,
they're our greatest. They're one of our greatest allies. So.
That's true.
Yeah. Just ask Blake Masters.
Yeah.
All right. I could think of a really a better place to end it on. Guys, this has been awesome, and I can't wait to share with everybody. So if you guys are got any more closing thoughts, we'll do plugs and rock and roll.
Yeah, I'm the only Reed Coverdale and the only naturalist capitalist. So just Google either of those and you'll find me.
Nice. Pat?
Yeah, well, I started rebranded my show. It's now called Vital Dissent. It used to be called Liberty Weekly. So I just kind of moved away from the Liberty branding because I think it's important to be teaming up with people from all across the spectrum who oppose war. And so that's the idea of the new project. So vitaldissent.com, libertarianinstitute.org. Thanks, Kyle.
Nice. Yeah, of course. Well, when you said spectrum, I thought about libertarians for a second, but
yeah.
Anyways, Connor, where can everybody find you?
Oh, last thing I'll add is I think that our move is to look at what I was saying about Europe and how it's uniting the left and the right, and do that here, because I think it should be easy if we just lead the charge on the anti-war movement. That is popular enough on both sides that the good people on both sides, on the left and the right and in between, that we can bring over to support us, just the same way Ron Paul did, but hopefully on a much larger scale even. But I think we all agree on that, and I don't think we're like the kind of libertarians who are like, well, I won't talk to so-and-so because they believe in socialized healthcare or something like that. Abby Martin or somebody, you can see the value in someone being that good on foreign policy. Right. That, of course, you want to work with them and unite with them. But anyway, I am, find all my stuff at the Libertarian Institute, featured articles and news, writing more and more news at antiwar.com as well. And always listen to Conflicts of Interest with me, Kyle Anzalone, and Will Porter. I'm on Twitter at Freeman's Mind 96. And thank you again, Kyle. This is awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So, make sure everybody you like, subscribe, and share. I don't know. I literally plug that every single time at the very end of the show. I don't know why, but like I said, I'm really pumped to put this out for everybody. So I hope everybody enjoyed, and until next time, let's rock and roll.